Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Contour Office Hours. Today is Thursday, January 7th, 2021. And I'm going to, for the office hours, we have an open floor. It's open to anyone to ask questions to the Contour maintainers and the Contour team. If you have any questions around user questions, usage questions, sorry, or how to contribute to Contour, go ahead. With that, Stephen, did you have any questions that you wanted to ask?
No, my team today is the Contour support Chase. So I just jumped on today to see if there was anything new come down the line, and so just sit here to absorb whatever information comes out. So
Cool. Yeah, thanks for coming. Welcome. I don't know what's new. I know we've got a bunch of design docs in progress. I know Steve, Chris, you're working a lot of the rate limiting stuff, which I think did you push some other commits I think I saw?
I pushed an update yesterday. Yeah, just to address some of the stuff we talked about at the end of last year. But I assume we'll need to probably have another discussion on it. And, you know, maybe approve parts of it and get started on implementing parts of it while we iron out details on the rest of it.
Yeah.
But it's, with Nick out this week, we're kind of just waiting for him to come back so we can all talk about this stuff together.
Yeah. I think there are a couple key things we're trying to figure out in terms of like the design and how to do it sort of thing. So cool. Yeah. And I was working on some of the conflict resolution bits. So I keep going back and forth on this. And the idea is that when you say you have you create an HTTP proxy, which has like an invalid service. Right now we mark it as invalid, but we end up not serving traffic to that proxy. The proxy becomes invalid, which is kind of bad because part of the object can be valid and other parts can be invalid. So, but the problem is the whole thing becomes invalid. So looking at ways that we can let the valid pieces still serve traffic and still handle that, but then filter back those errors back to the user in a special way, or a way that makes sense, I guess. So I keep going back and forth in my head in terms of, I think James and some folks suggested, returning different status codes. So say, a service is invalid, maybe return a 500 status code or something else. But to me, that feels weird because you're now having these error codes back to your users who shouldn't know or care about Kubernetes or Contour. But at the same time, it's better than, I think like you said, Steve, in a comment today, it's better than having it serve the wrong path or have traffic go different places, which you don't want. So yeah.
Because right now, if say you have a route that's invalid in a proxy, then the proxy gets marked invalid, right? And not configured.
Right, yeah,
at all.
Yep, right.
And so in that case, like both that specific route as well as any other routes on the proxy are just gonna return 404s, I guess, right?
Yeah, it just doesn't get configured. So it's like it never happened. Yeah. And it hurts more, I think, the higher up in the stack it happens, or higher up in the chain. So if a route is invalid, then everything's down, which is unfortunate.
Yeah. So from my perspective, like returning specific errors, and we can go back and forth on the status codes, but that seems like an improvement to me. It might still not be perfect. Like having, admission or some kind of versioning on the config is probably the best solution, but I do think it's an improvement, and it's probably more straightforward to implement than those other things.
Yeah, no, I think for sure. Yeah, I think we could, I think, in my head, I've always wanted this like a mission controller to where we avoid the problem altogether and having to deal with the situation. So if you reference a service that doesn't exist, then just, when you kubectl apply that, then let that, drop that, ignore that request, and don't let it get applied. The problem in Contour today is that we validate after the object is applied to the API server. So it's always after the fact, validation. So you've got to figure out a way to manage that in a good way. So we could, I think you had an idea, Steve, about, the copy method. So have we had this actually back when we were designing Ingress route. It was called like last known good configuration kind of thing, where you would before an update would apply, you would take the current configuration and you would back it up into an object. So when these errors happened, you could slot back to that old config and still serve traffic properly. But that is not without its issues and design issues as well in terms of implementing that.
Yeah,
easily.
definitely a huge change. I mean, I think about how deployment works in Kubernetes, and with like the rollout and rollback semantics. I think there could be some useful things there, but I agree that's a pretty big change, and we shouldn't just go down that path without thinking about it a lot first.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, so I'll go update that. I know James had some comments in there. I can pull it up if y'all want to see it. What I'm talking about. Share screen. Where are you? Not that one. This one. Oh yeah, this was the doc here. So it's 3145, and you can see the couple of different issues that are relevant to this. I mean, this goes back to December of 19, October. Anyway, but yeah, so there's I have to push some commits to this, but this is the general idea. And what I tried to do with this one is have like these tables of things. So hey, like when you have in a route in a condition, if you have an invalid prefix, what should it return? And then I was trying to figure out too what to set for conditions. So what I was going with, and I don't know if this makes sense or not, but when we changed the response back to a user, I was calling that an error. So in this case, like, hey, if I had a bad condition somehow, instead of routing traffic to that service, we're going to return a 404. So I made that an error because we're changing the response back to the user. But for something like, hey, a timeout policy, if you somehow have something invalid in there, we can simply just drop that from configuration to Envoy, I think. And then that would become a warning because we didn't actually change the response. I guess maybe we did. I don't know. This is where I'm stuck on figuring out what's an error and what's a warning. You know what I mean? That was kind of what I went with, I guess. So where's another example of that? Down here in service. Yeah, if the service is gone, we can return a 503 or a 502 or whatever else makes sense. But like if the headers are bad, I made that a warning. So we could just say, hey, this is misconfigured, drop that off, and then move on.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable to me. I think the tricky thing is, and I commented on this, is like once you have errors, then the proxy gets like its status condition of valid is set to false, meaning it's invalid, which I just think is a little confusing from the user's perspective because it's invalid, but at the same time it is still partially programming Envoy. So it's not really like fully valid or fully invalid. It's somewhere in the middle. It's partially valid. And I don't, we just can't represent that in our current condition scheme. So
yeah,
may just be a documentation thing that, invalid doesn't necessarily mean none of it's being programmed in Envoy, but it does mean that there are errors in the configuration.
Right.
Some parts of it.
I guess how could we change that and make it like partially like have a new status instead of error? I don't know, like what would?
Well, it's because conditions are always true or false, right?
Oh, with that thing. Oh, okay. Yeah.
So it's tricky.
Yeah.
I mean, like outside of, if we weren't sort of stuck within the conditions world, like, yeah, I don't know. I would just maybe differentiate between sort of fatal errors and regular errors, or I don't know, some difference between like the thing was not programmed at all, or parts of the thing were programmed, or the entire thing was programmed as specified.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's similar to what I was trying to get to here, is making these errors. I was trying to say, hey, like you said, like if the headers are invalid, we can just drop that configuration from Envoy and not set it. I guess what if it's partial though? That could be something. Like what if you had 5 headers on a condition set, and one of them is bad, but the rest of the 4 are okay? What would we do? Yeah, I'll have to think of those as well. There's so many like edge cases of things that can go wrong.
And that's probably why in the past it's been like, if anything's wrong, mark it invalid and force the user to fix it, because it's not always easy to assume the user's intent, right?
Yeah. Yep. And it's just kind of misleading too. Just invalid everything. You can probably delete that column. Yeah. Okay.
I mean, I was reading more on the service API stuff, and there the routes are their own custom resources. So you have
Mhm.
HTTP or whatever they call them, HTTP routes and TLS routes, and in that case, like you could mark individual routes invalid, right?
Right.
Which would be nice. So you call the route invalid, but that doesn't make the overall sort of proxy invalid
Right.
or the gateway invalid.
Yeah. Maybe that's useful. I know back in the beginning designs, Dave was willing to have like a single resource. So I guess that sort of introduced some of our issues, but the goal was to have this be simple, this CRD. So we wouldn't have, I think that my original design, I had three. I had the root was like its own CRD, and then the children pieces, like the delegation bits were different CRDs to manage the hierarchy better. But for simplicity, I think we went away from that, just to be able to match kind of how Ingress worked, where you can have just one simple document, not to have 4 different CRDs spun up to make it all work for simple things.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can see where that's helpful. I keep trying to look over to that too as well with service APIs, especially in these discussions of how we're going to handle the same thing there. And I guess, like you said, maybe that's easier because it's a different design. So maybe that's handled already. But there was one, I think, from Nick has a design doc as well, which I think I asked a couple questions about as well. In a similar vein, in terms of how things would get handled. Where is Nick's? This one. So 3213. So folks aren't familiar, service APIs is the evolution of Kubernetes services. Originally, this was thought of as Ingress v2, and now this has turned into a broader, just more of service implementation for Kubernetes. So it includes the Ingress v2 stuff, but also handles TCP and UDP and those sort of types of protocols. So the Contour team has been a part of that project. It's a SIG within Kubernetes, and Nick here has put a little design doc together in terms of thinking about how Contour can implement at least portions of this API, because there are some bits that today we can't handle. Mainly the TCP and UDP bits are the big ones. But in here there are, Nick walks through a whole bunch of stuff to figure out, how we're going to map again those different pieces of this API into Contour. But I think there are some pieces that can have the same issue that we're talking about here. I think mainly around listeners and that sort of stuff. So, but we'll figure it out. We'll get through it. But I hope to not go down the same path where we have the same issues implementing this, which I think we can avoid walking into it clean.
I'm just thinking, I wonder if, so right now we on HTTP proxy, we just have the one top level condition, which is called valid. And that's got to be true or false. And I wonder if you could, instead of just having one valid condition, you could have like a, virtual host valid condition. You could have like a routes valid condition. And then each of those could contain some information on, whether the individual parts of the proxy are valid or not. Because if you're in a world where you are partially configuring Envoy based on the proxy, then it seems like you would want to break things up like that. You're on mute, Steve.
I got the thing. Did it come off? No. Yeah, it did. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I got the fancy Stream Deck thing going because I got like lights and stuff. So like,
oh, yeah.
I'm all like a streamer now. But I've got a button now for mute on there, which is cool. But it's got like a 3-second delay, which is sometimes irritating. Yeah, that can work. I mean, I think today what's in there, it's just generic. It doesn't tell you what. It's just very, very generic for the conditions bit. Even having like a category would be helpful or something like, hey, this condition applies to a route and this is what's wrong. We'll kind of give you the same thing as well, I think. Yeah, that's part B too, and not to drum through for PRs, but that was what I was trying to get out too. And this other one was this metadata stuff for status or conditions, that sort of stuff. So being able to pick apart some of that information better and drive this. I think we're almost to a point where we need like a kubectl plugin or an Octant plugin or something, to help visualize some of this stuff or expose some of this stuff back. I think it'd be interesting. because we combine these two together. Sorry, so I'm jumping all around. So if you're not familiar with this idea was to expose more information. So if you are a child HTTP proxy off in a namespace somewhere, it's difficult to know what path is sent to you and what headers and what domain even you're handling requests for, just because of the design of it. So in the past ingress route, you had to redefine the path that you did. So say you were going to handle /blog in the child proxy somewhere else, you had to actually say, hey, I'm /blog. And the parent delegation and the child had to match that path prefix bit. Now within HTTP proxy, with inclusion, you don't have to respecify that path. So if a parent delegates you / or includes with you /blog, then the child doesn't have to actually even define a path prefix in their namespace. But I guess without someone telling you, hey, you've been delegated this path, it's difficult to know what you have without having that internal communication. So this was the goal of that, was to somehow expose that information off to users. So it'd be interesting to know, what name, which proxy gave you your include. So name and namespace, the domain name you're working off of, and then the conditions that came to you. There's probably more you'd want to have you pick apart. This was the main stuff, I think, from the start. Having this then would give you, again, a way we could drive a dashboard or some more support information to kind of understand what's going on. But I think then if we include this PR with the conflict one, now we've got a cool UI to know what's wrong and how it's wrong and what traffic's getting sent where or not getting sent where, I guess. So those are all good ones to poke at. Sorry, I'm distracted by my computer. Yeah, so those are a couple of things I think, again, looking ahead to get these designs in is helpful to let other folks pick things up. So I think it's super helpful. And that was one of the things that Dave wanted to do back in the day when we started Contour, was having a lot of these design docs, and that's out here in Contour Design. Having these built out first, which means that we've thought about all the different issues and things, and then someone can jump in and implement without having to go through all this design and thought work. Is there anything else in here we want to chat about? Hey, Sanjay's here. I know there's this. Sorry, go ahead.
I just had a question. I'm not sure if this is relevant at all, but I'm working with another project called Pinniped. I don't know if you've seen that. And I know we've been looking at authentication and authorization for quite some time as well. I was wondering if the two projects could be used together somehow, or if Pinniped is not the right choice here.
Is Pinniped, is it, I guess when I looked at it when it first launched, was that it was more of like auth for the cluster itself.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if that is at all relevant here.
I don't know. I think for Contour, I don't think in terms of users accessing, because users shouldn't, I don't think you want to tie your external users to users in the cluster per se. But I guess potentially they could we leverage Pinniped to be, the external auth provider in the middle?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe. What is it? Pinniped.
Pinniped. And PINNIPED.
It's
.dev.
It's like a general solution for complementing Dex. So I think if they're using Pinniped as a substitute for Dex as an external auth, it would go through the single sign-on or OIDZ flow of authenticating users. I like that's how I think about it. That Envoy would interact with it on some level, and then redirect it to the correct pod upstream.
So you said you could replace this with Dex, or this replaces Dex?
I think the original, like they position it as something complementary to Dex, but eventually it would, provide the entire suite of capabilities that Dex has. as a single OAuth 2 identity provider. So potentially it would just be the same. It would work just like Dex, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the long-term plan.
Okay.
But it's like specifically for Kubernetes, not generic like Dex.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's more around authing to the API server versus which
right.
is a different scope. But I think, I mean, Contour is still in need, I think, and this has come up a few times internally, of Contour has, this external auth provider's configuration, but we don't have, a good OIDC plan today. There was that Istio this thing. And this is what Alex, we were chatting about on Slack the other night. So Contour has external auth, and that basically means you get the plumbing. So it gives you all the plumbing to have, basically have Contour configure Envoy to say, hey, when a request comes in, I want you to go to this external auth server. So first, before you get to Dex or OAuth or Auth0 or anything like that, you've got to have an internal component that Envoy is going to talk to.
Right.
And this is one. So you can plug in anything. It doesn't really matter what it is. And now Istio has this one, this auth service, which implements that, that gRPC endpoint the same way that Istio would use it, because they're using Envoy as well behind the hoods. So I tried getting this to work. I had trouble with it, not reflecting on the project, just I think I couldn't get it to work. But I think we had a good either example of this, or if Pinniped can fill that spot or something, that'd be cool. But I think we need to definitely have a good guide on how to do OIDC with Contour, to let folks be able to do this easily. Cool.
I mean, it may be a little bit outside of the scope of this meeting, but Pinniped is going to be part of the Calgary release for TKG. So I'm not sure if it's going to be like the de facto single sign-on solution moving forward, but it's going to be one of the identity providers that you can use. So I think it'd be worthwhile to have that conversation with the Pinniped team, just to think about, if it's useful to us.
Yeah, I'll have to see. I think I looked at it when it got announced, and I did the quick hello world example down here. I think this was it here. I think I walked through this one and I got it. I think I got it working out of the box, but that's as far as I got. And then other shiny things distracted me. Cool. So we can poke through that and see. Maybe we can hop over. When is their community meeting, Jonas? Did it happen already? I guess I could look here in community and I could figure it out myself.
Yeah, exactly. It's on the first and third Thursday. So it was earlier today at 9 a.m. Pacific. So about an hour and a half ago.
Okay. Guess we could just hop into theirs and crash their party and bring it up. Cool. I'm not sure if we want to chat about anything else or demo anything, or if there's any of these PRs we can chat about or anything to help since we're all together. I know Sanjay, you're working on this conformance stuff. There's been some work as well in service APIs to also, I think they took, let me find that issue or that PR. But there was similar work that they wanted to have, end-to-end tests for service APIs. I think they took the same framework, this Ingress controller framework, but then kind of tweaked it a little bit differently. So not using the same exact code. You might be interested in. And I was wondering if we could just contribute to that. And then in theory, that controller integration test should cover, I think, Contour at least all the service APIs surface area, as well as, you know, the community. It'd be a cool place to contribute. I think it was this here. Yeah, this is from Rob. We probably should link these two together. But yeah, so Rob has a good discussion here of what he was working on. And then I think there's examples here of some simple tests. I think what you ran into, Sanjay, was some of the tests we don't actually implement in Contour yet, so they're always going to fail. Is that what the issue you had, I think?
Yeah, the V1 ingress, we don't actually implement that all the way. So it still fails.
Yeah, we should pick that back up and finish that off.
Yeah, there was I think Nick had grabbed an action item. I have to talk to him again about if because he was implying that it was closely related to the service API stuff. So they kind of go hand in hand maybe, but maybe we can decouple the V1 ingress stuff from that.
But yeah, there was an issue. There was a thought. So service APIs has this notion, I guess we could pull up a diagram, but there's this idea of this gateway class.
Yeah.
And the gateway class defines kind of how it's basically the external endpoint of where things should define. So this should be like Contour could be a gateway class. In theory, that if you're running a bunch of different contours in a cluster, should you have a separate instance of Contour for each gateway, or should you have one instance of Contour handle multiple gateways in a sense? I think that was our discussion before. And I think we landed on having, you know, a separate instance per gateway, which kind of would map to how we did ingress class today. And that was the ingress V1 issue, I believe, where I think I did a PR, maybe I closed it. Ingress V1. Yeah.
Yeah.
August. Whew. Feels like forever ago, doesn't it? So there's this ingress class name in the ingress resource. So instead of having to annotate the ingress resource, you can just, there's a name in the spec to actually a field for it. And that was our discussion before. I'm not sure where we ended up with it though. So maybe we can just pick this. I can just reopen this PR and then just finish it after I fix all of the comments and things. Basically, it's been that long, July. Sorry, I think I'm talking forever. Someone else can chat.
Yeah, there's that last comment, which is around, I don't know what the issue is. Okay, yeah, that is also interesting. Because it seems like with the service API stuff, maybe I'm not reading it right, but it seems like Nick's proposal is saying that Contour will watch gateway class objects, whereas the operator proposal is saying the operator will watch gateway class objects and instantiate a Contour and set of envoys for each gateway, which is different. Like it brings it up at one more level than what the Contour proposal is.
Right. Yeah, I think because Contour is not going to create like resources within Kubernetes. It's only going to watch for different routes and such to actually serve the traffic. I think the operator's focused on spinning up the Contour infrastructure itself. So the Contour deployment and the Envoy daemon set. So it should watch those and then see, oh, there's a new gateway class now. Let me go give you some resources to manage that.
So I haven't gotten to read the operator design doc yet, but it sounds like the operator would watch gateway class and in response to a new one, create a Contour and an Envoy. And then Contour itself would watch it just for the purposes of identifying gateways and listeners and routes that it should be programming an Envoy, right?
Right. Yep. And I think it's got to pass in when, yeah. So when the operator sees that new gateway class gets spun up, forget if it's a class or a gateway. I got to understand this better. But it's going to set, like, there's a flag and contour we set for ingress class, which we can maybe call it gateway class or make a new one now to deprecate out ingress class or something. But contour should only watch its specific one that it's concerned about, you know?
Yeah, so the phrasing that Nick has in the service in his contour proposal is that contour considers a gateway class an associated set of gateways to describe a single Envoy deployment, which is not what the operator has, right? The operator has a gateway class which describes this is what contour is. And then each instance of a gateway that someone creates is an instance of contour.
Right, but then that instance of contour that the operator creates is only going to watch that one specific gateway class.
That one. So how does that work? I thought the routes and whatnot were applied to a gateway. Maybe I'm not understanding what the gateway class part of it is.
So there were some good examples out here in this one. So the gateway class, I think, defines like contour. Contour is going to be the gateway class. So it's the one that's going to implement the gateway. I believe the gateway then defines, so in this example here, if you guys can see, so here the gateway class is Acme load balancer. This I think could be contour. And then we're going to define the listeners for that gateway. But I think you can have, in theory, multiple gateways, which may or may not be the most common sense, like a common, straightforward way of doing that.
Yeah, well, as per the operator proposal, each individual gateway would be a contour instance, I believe.
Oh, if that's true, I missed that. I thought it was the gateway class, but maybe that's.
I mean, we definitely talked in Contour Land about like all gateways of a certain class corresponding to just a single contour and Envoy instance. So it sounds like
operator is maybe taking that a different way, which is the mismatch.
Yeah, we probably need to. Probably all need to get together and talk about it and reconcile that, because I think that's at odds with what we had discussed as the operating model for Contour.
Yeah, so gateway class points to a contour config, which here.
I'm sorry, I'm scrolling. Yeah, but that makes sense. So a gateway class, so this should be an instance of contour, and a contour config is basically this, which defines today just like the number of replicas and which namespace you want to deploy that instance of contour into. So if I wanted to have, say, an internal L7 controller and an external L7 controller, I would have two classes, I think. I would have the internal class and the external class, which would give me two different contour instances. And then each have their own gateway they would define further down, which would be here, yeah. So you would pin a gateway then to the gateway. So this could be like internal, runs on port 80, and then you could have another one for external running on port 80. And then from the gateway, you would then tie a route, listeners, and then you'd have your routes. Here, your HTTP route, which is not going to get confusing, I don't think, in Contour against proxy. But yeah, then here you would define the route, flowing to the right place. The part that gets me is that it's a label selector, which I still can't get my head around. So today, where you map, a route to a service, here you map a listener to select a route based on labels.
Oh, and then your routes are just sitting outside, and you just select them based on the labels on the route.
Yeah, so you could instead of here saying like, hey, this route, slash goes to example HTTP route in this what's on the screen here. It's just a label selector. So I think in theory you could have multiple routes all matching label selectors, and they all would sum together through that. So slash foo could be a route, slash bar can be a route, and they'll all get added to this listener based on that label selector, which is kind of cool because it helps decouple our issue today in Contour where we've got everything in one object, and then how to deal with the errors in that one single object.
Okay, maybe I'm misreading this then, because it seemed like a single gateway was an instance of a contour, but maybe I'm wrong here.
Well, Danion's here. We can put him on the spot.
Hey, yeah, nice little surprise. Sorry.
No, you're cool.
Had a conflict here, but I'm glad I was able to join and see that we're kind of going through the design spec.
So we've been all over the place since you started. So we've been starting out with different conflict resolution things and talking about things, and somehow we ended up with we're talking about the integration test that Sanjay was working on. So he was adding the upstream where was it? Ingress. Yeah, the Ingress V1 stuff. And we have some issues today because Contour doesn't have all the full support. And then I brought up the work that Rob was doing on service APIs of adding the Ingress stuff, the integration tests based on the Ingress framework that's out there today, saying, hey, we should help contribute to that. I know I was wanting to look at helping out with that as well. And then that ended us back into, well, how does service APIs handle these sort of things? And then we ended up into this, well, how's the operator going to handle things? And then you popped on. So here's where we are. So Sanjay, do you want to ask your question? I guess that you can verbalize what your question was with this.
Yeah, maybe I'm reading the two proposals wrong, but it seemed like Nick's proposal or the operator proposal was saying that an individual, like when a user creates an instance of a gateway, that is an Envoy and its associated, or sorry, a Contour and its associated Envoy deployment. So if you create multiple of those, you get multiple contours.
Right, and I'm going through Nick's proposal. What is it? The PR 3213, and commenting. And I left a comment in the alternatives considered section that I basically state that I think that the alternatives that he described is more in line with the PR that I created for Contour operator for this design spec. And I've kind of been thinking that it's probably wise for us next week to kind of get both parties and the whole group together and try to all sit down and kind of go through and hash this out. But yeah, I mean, the way that I look at things is like a gateway class is just it's like an envelope for an implementation specific configuration, right? So, all it does is say, hey, here's my name and here's the parameters ref that is a custom resource, or just any resource. It could be a config map. And going through this design process, that was something that I considered, but I decided that a kind of a config resource, such as what I called Contour config, would be preferred, so that we could actually have a structured configuration and instead of a config map. So if we just think of gateway class as something that holds a configuration, and then it's spinning up gateways, that the gateway, the purpose of the gateway is like that it doesn't have to have all the detailed configuration, right? It has some basics, and then it says, hey, you're part of a gateway class. And again, if we just think of a gateway class as a piece of configuration, then the gateway spins up, has basic configuration, because we have to understand we've got different personas, right? We've got one persona that would be responsible for the gateway class. That would be like the infrastructure provider that has all the details of the environment. And then you'd have like a cluster administrator, and the cluster administrator, or let's not even call it a cluster administrator, but just an administrator, right? An administrator that would be able to say, okay, the provider gave me a few different types of gateways, right? The types are what we're calling these gateway classes, right? So we could think of internal and external gateway classes. And I, as an administrator, can go ahead and spin up gateways, which are instances of a gateway. For us, a gateway is, Contour and Envoy, right? And so when I spin up the gateway, I don't need to know all of these details of how network ports are published and everything that would be in this Contour config, right? All I need to know is that, hey, when I spin up a gateway, if I want this to be an external gateway, I go ahead and reference the external gateway class. Or if I want it to be an internal, right, and not be exposed to the public internet, my infrastructure provider gave me two options, the external gateway class and the internal gateway class. So I want an internal gateway. I'm going to spin it up and say use the internal class, which again, I don't know all the detailed specific configuration that would be in the gateway class, which really doesn't, again, have much. It doesn't. It's just a pointer to some object that has a bunch of configuration in there, which again, for our purposes, would be a Contour config as it's named today. Right. And so if we think about this, we could have these administrators, let's say it's a bunch of different namespaces, and each namespace has an admin, and say, okay, well, go ahead, admin, go ahead and spin up your gateways. And the admin says, okay, well, which types of gateways do I have available? They look at the gateway classes, they see internal, external. Okay, I want to spin up an internal gateway, and provide some basic information for when that administrator creates a gateway. Right. And now essentially by creating that gateway, it spins up a Contour and everything that we need, right? The Contour deployment, the Envoy daemon set, all that stuff, right? And now the next persona is actually an app dev, right? So now there's actually a gateway up and available. App dev says, I want to start creating routes. They do a search and say, oh, look, I've got a gateway here available. It's called internal, or maybe they have both, right? Maybe the other persona, the administrator, for its namespace, created an external and an internal. And so the app dev says, now I want to go ahead and create routes, right? Pre-service APIs, this is the same person that's thinking, oh, I want to create an HTTP proxy. Right? Contour has already been provisioned, everything like that, right? And that's what the operator's taking care of, all the infrastructure pieces, the gateway class, which again, is nothing but a piece of configuration, right? The gateway class, along with what it points to, which is a Contour config. It's just a piece of configuration. I mean, it'd be the same thing as if it didn't exist and it's just a config map sitting up there. And when I create a gateway, if there is some reference to a config map that says, here's your configuration, but instead we're taking the structured approach of a gateway class that points to an implementation specific configuration, and which is a parameters ref field, right? And so again, if we go back to the app dev persona, app dev, all they know is, hey, there's gateways available to you, look them up, kubectl, get gateways. I see internal, external. Oh, I want to expose this route to one or both. And creates the HTTP route. And in that HTTP route, right, that app dev says, which gateway do I want to use for this route? And that's where Contour really cares about, right? So what I see is Contour has a watch on these application level service APIs, HTTP route, TLS route, you name it. What is the other one's like a backend policy, right? And that's what it's watching and saying, okay, let me now start constructing the DAG. Well, first I need to make sure that that I am the gateway that it points to, because with these gateway references could be across different namespaces. The gateway holds that policy, right? And it's kind of a two-way relationship between the gateway and the route, right? So when you create the gateway, you say, hey, is this gateway available to all namespaces, to a single namespace, using label selectors and so forth. So there's different kind of ways that the gateway can say, I will allow certain types of routes to bind to me as a gateway. And so, Contour needs to watch these different app level service APIs like HTTP route, inspect the details of that to say, okay, which gateway is this route trying to bind to? And then look up and say, am I that gateway? Oh, I am that gateway. And does my gateway allow this route to be bound to me, right? Because again, it's a two-way relationship. Can this route bind to me? Look at the gateway config and say, okay, this is a gateway match, but do I allow as a gateway to have this route bind to me? Say, oh yes, okay, great. Now let's take all that application level stuff, right? Routing rules and so forth, and use that to construct the DAG.
So then will we apply so an example, so I'm going to have a gateway class that's external. So say I'm in AWS, then is that where I would set up my ELB annotation kind of stuff to say, hey, this should be an external? Because for Contour,
right? I mean, that's what gives us the flexibility of like what external means. Mm-hmm. It can mean different things, right? To your point, well, okay, let's say it's AWS and this creates my AWS ALB, but this gives us the flexibility to describe what external means or what internal means, right? So in AWS, AWS provides the ability based traditionally, right? Using a service and annotating that service to say this is an internal load balancer, right? Typically, we create services of type load balancer, and it gives us an AWS, if AWS is our cloud provider, gives us an AWS standard, ELB, right? But I could go ahead and annotate that service, right? And say, well, go ahead and apply the annotation that says use this as an internal load balancer. So, when I go ahead and I create my gateway class, if that's my intent, then I'm going to go ahead and say, okay, let me go to the Contour config, right? And the Contour config would expose, hey, what's your network publishing type? Internal. Well, what does internal mean to us, right? Internal means that we create an internal load balancer. So that's the way I'm going to construct my Contour config that's referenced by this gateway class. And again, we do that so that these administrators, right, namespace administrator, or whatever it is that has access to creating and managing gateways, they don't need to know all that. All they need to know is, hey, this external or this internal gateway class means that I don't expose to the public internet. And so does that help answer your question?
No, that helps me. Yeah. So this is one of those things where you can talk for 5 minutes and do the work of a week of GitHub comments back and forth.
Right. And I didn't, until you shared this link, I wasn't aware of what Nick put together with this PR. I was kind of going off of that decision PR, and I did veer off in a bit of a different direction. Mm-hmm. But I think, I think it's still good that we discuss this, look at different ways of solving a problem and seeing, which way is the best way to do it. This is the way that I see things from, from my understanding of service APIs and Contour. And I've always thought, as I think through this, I'm like, okay, if we just think of how things are done today, right? Contour doesn't do anything with the infrastructure level. I mean, gateway class and gateway is meant to be infrastructure level APIs. And Contour in today's world, it's just looking at L7 type of resources, right? Mm-hmm. Ingress, HTTP proxy. And that's the way that I continue to see things moving forward now. Contour, as it relates to service APIs, as I mentioned earlier, it's still going to need to read the gateway, right? To make sure, again, that the route that it sees, that the route that it sees, right? Again, that route is going to have a pointer or reference a gateway, mm-hmm. Right? And so let's say I'm a Contour, right? And I see all these routes out there. I'm looking at all of them, but I need to say, is this route important to me? Because there could be other contours in the environment reading all those routes too, right? So it needs to look at those routes, HTTP route, for example, look at the gateway reference and say, am I the gateway, right?
Right.
And when it says that, it then is going to say, oh, I am the gateway, and then make sure that that binding relationship, because again, it's two-way, gateway to route and route to gateway, and make sure that that binding relationship is good to go, and then process the route.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I mean, gateway class, like you said, if we think of that as just, I have it up here on the screen, you think of that as just configuration, like I always think of storage class. That's the first kind of class that I guess we were introduced to, I think, storage class for persistent volumes. It doesn't mean it's an actual, PV sitting somewhere on some network storage. It's just the configuration of what it would look like. So then in this scenario, a gateway is actually an instance of Contour. So if I had 10 gateways, I should have 10 contours, given that they match the gateway class of Contour.
Right, because if gateway class didn't exist, right? Think about it, if gateway class didn't exist, then we have these platform operators that need to understand all the details of a Contour config, right? Right. So what we want to be able to do is say the platform provider really knows the details of the environment, right? They're the ones that are saying, hey, if you want to create a Contour that's exposed to the public internet, you need to set up the network publishing of type external and this, that, and the other, right? So that's why gateway class exists. And I mean, if you look at the API spec, there's really nothing there besides, again, a reference to an implementation specific configuration object. And that object, at least as it stands today with my design, is what we call a Contour config. Yeah. Right. And so what we can do here is now the platform operators say, okay, great. My platform provider said that by default, I get two different types of gateways, either external or internal. And I can go ahead and spin up all the Contour environments I want without having to know those specific details of how to expose a Contour for internal only or external, all that kind of stuff. And then when we get to the service operator, right, all they're doing is creating the same thing as HTTP proxies or ingress resources. And they just need to know, well, what gateway are you going to tie this to? And they could do that all they want, or try to tie to gateways and other namespaces and all across, the cluster. But that, because of that two-way relationship, that Contour, which is our gateway, will enforce, will say, oh, this person over here in this picture is trying to, bind this HTTP route to me, but I've got, a policy that says that I only allow routes in the same namespace, and this service operator in this picture lives in some other namespace, so I'm just not going to allow the bind to happen, and then I'll reflect that error. I believe it's just in gateway status. Maybe it's in the actual route status. It should be in the route status as well as being not admitted.
No, I like that. I mean, we could even go create like a whole library of gateway classes for like Azure, for all the different providers in a sense. I mean, they wouldn't have the specific Contour bits, which today I'm not sure there is much in there. But we could have this big library of how to do all those different types of providers. And you can plug that in, right? And then just pick it out and then attach your gateway to it, and boom, you'd automatically have that configuration, which is cool.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'd like to circle back to Sanjay. Sanjay, what are your thoughts?
No, that was my reading of the two different proposals and them being different. And your proposal totally makes sense. It's just that it's the only thing that I was bringing up was that it was. Well, I guess we were talking about ingress class as well. Ingress v1, ingress class. And I think that given your proposal, the idea that these two ideas are related, like gateway class and ingress class, maybe the way that it's being interpreted, it doesn't quite make sense that they're that related anymore. I don't know. I have to read a little bit more on the ingress class stuff, but it doesn't seem like that needs to be conflated that much, I guess. But yeah, this proposal totally makes sense, and like bringing it up to a higher level from Envoy with the personas is a clear way to explain it. But yeah, I guess just the difference between your proposal and Nick's was what was striking to me.
Yeah, I mean, we're gonna have to have this. We're gonna have to have this conversation again with Nick, because I know we discussed this at length last year, and Nick and James, I think, had pretty strong opinions that ended up with us mapping like a contour and an Envoy to a gateway class. And there were reasons, but now that I'm looking back in the issues and stuff that document it, it doesn't really lay out what the reasons were, just that the conclusion was that a contour and an Envoy should correspond to a gateway class. So we're gonna have to talk about it with them when they're both back in the office.
Yeah, and I agree 100%. I mean, they've been super involved in service APIs as well, and want to make sure that we're all on board. I wasn't part of those conversations, but yeah, I think we need to all get together in this type of environment and have this discussion, and I'd like to have it as soon as possible, because I need to start chipping away at this from the operator side. So we need to get this done.
I definitely remember one of the considerations was thinking about kind of the size of the Envoy footprint in any given cluster, right? So if you say that a gateway corresponds to an Envoy deployment, and Envoy is being deployed as a daemon set, then if you have several gateways, then you're deploying several Envoy daemon sets, which all deploy a pod per node, and you can pretty quickly take up a whole bunch of capacity in your cluster in that way. And
I was going to address that. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I can't remember like what conclusions came out of that, but I do remember that as a discussion point when we were talking about all this.
Yeah, and I was going to kind of call that out in one of Steve Sloka's comments to my design spec. And the way that I look at that is like, we're basically saying, because of the way we currently manage Envoy, that should affect the design moving forward. And I feel like it's the reverse, where we say, what's the best way to do this? And the best way to do this also means that, the way that we used to do things, like managing Envoy as a daemon set, really isn't the best way to do that in this model, because, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the way that I looked at things as I joined the community and started getting involved was like, okay, you create a contour, right? You create a contour environment, and it's just like, Envoy runs everywhere. But now we look at this environment, we say, well, you have multiple different contour environments. When I say a contour environment, I'm talking contour, Envoy, all that stuff, right? I just think of contour and Envoy together, right? So now we can have all these different contour environments, and it doesn't really necessarily make sense that a particular instance of contour, or the Envoy daemon set associated with that contour, runs on all nodes, right? And so I think that's where we look back and say, well, is that really the best way to do it, at least for service APIs? And maybe we start thinking like, maybe it should be run as a deployment, or just to kind of peel the layers back on that further.
Yeah, I think there's two parts, and I think it was in here somewhere. I was trying to scroll through and look, but one sense was, to have to couple contour to an Envoy instance or a set of envoys, and the second one would be to have one set of envoys mapped to multiple contours. If that makes sense, right? So we could reuse, one essentially daemon set, one fleet of envoys for multiple, I guess, in the example of service APIs, multiple gateways, right? So I could have 10 gateways, and they'd all use the same envoys under the hood, but you'd have different contours programming them from the top. That would help, remove some of that issue there. It wouldn't solve the problem of running on all nodes, but that would remove that, versus I think James was saying, hey, we've got all of these envoys running. So in the same example where I've got 10 different contours, I now have, at least 10 different instances of Envoy running, regardless of how I deploy it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think that's probably the core of the difference between the proposals And that is the way that I see things is like a contour aligns with, you know, a set of envoys where it seems like the other proposal is, you know, a contour could manage, you know, multiple different fleets of envoys.
Yeah, I think this here is where James was saying that. Yeah, a gateway class corresponds to an envoy data plane component, but then you can have, I think, multiple contours responding to the same class. Is what he was saying. Again, not that that's just, I think that was the conversation. That was one side of it. Yeah. So I'm not disagreeing that, you know, having a daemon set run on every node, we could optimize that better for sure. But I think this is the other optimization as well that we could also further go down that road of discussing. I think we left it as to not do that, just for the sheer complexity of having, you know, how many different sets of contours configuring envoys, because that gets weird with in terms of just having issues and stuff.
Yeah, I think for simplicity, coupling the control plane and the data plane together in discrete units is easier. And
yeah,
you know, if we think of kind of that that use case where I described, right, multiple namespaces, and each namespace is like an application team that wants to have their own, you know, discrete gateway and so forth. Like in that model, then each of those own discrete gateways are really just separate data planes that are managed by a shared control plane. And if something goes wrong with that control plane, now it affects all those different namespace admins. And I think the complexity of, okay, yeah, I mean, so we've got a single contour per class. We've got multiple fleets of envoys being managed by a contour. So even with service APIs aside, that seems very different than the model that is today, where Contour is managing a single fleet of envoys, right?
Right. No, it does.
So with service APIs aside, are there challenges? Because that seems like a very different model where it's like, I guess my approach is like very much similar to, I feel like it's very similar to how we do things today. So what are some of the challenges, or are there any challenges with this new model of saying, okay, a single contour managing potentially lots of different fleets of envoys?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that's just another way you could look at it. I think I don't think we want to go down that road. I think today that having them be coupled together is, to me, the simplicity of it is far outweighs any resource allocation on set of servers. Do you know what I mean? But I don't know. I'm not sure how many sets of contours people are going to run in the same cluster either at any given time. You know, like, well, I've heard of 2 at most from folks, the internal and external. Yeah, I've never really heard of more. So, you know, I also don't want to engineer for a scenario that's not really realistic, you know.
Right. Yeah, and I think, you know, since we do have a solid use case around this internal and external concept, and for me, I can, you know, I can understand that, and I feel like I understand that pretty well. So, you know, again, even with that use case, we're now talking about 2 different fleets of envoys, right? That would be managed by a single control plane contour.
So in that internal, external, just maybe tangential question, internal, external mode, would you have 2 separate sets of nodes with 2 different daemon sets that one runs on each node? Because how do you like have the ports that one set of envoys is listening to, which are going to be 80 and 443, that are going to be the same on both, right? Or do you
absolutely, which brings us back to kind of that issue that I mentioned, like whether it's 2 sets of envoys or 100 sets of envoys, it's still that same core issue is like, well, we're going to have port collisions, there's going to be issues running envoy as a daemon set. And so I think as part of this effort, we need to really consider moving envoy to a deployment.
know you had an issue on that. Where was that? Or did Micaiah open it?
Oh, using a deployment resource to manage Envoy.
Yeah, and I thought you had an open issue on that.
I wonder if it's on the operator side.
It could
I don't
be.
know.
Because there was good discussion on it too. I think you and Micaiah both had good points. I think that there's no reason to keep the current deployment model we have. We just need to chat about it and then just do it, I think. And then that would help remove those limitations, Sanjay, that you're describing, that would make that much simpler, I think.
Unless there's any technical limitations, like, okay, I would like to know what is the reason why Envoy has to run as a daemon set. Again, being relatively new to the community, the first thing I thought is like, okay, well, this is easy, right? I mean, we want proxies on every single node in the cluster, or at least the worker nodes, right? But is there a reason that the Envoy has to run as a daemon set?
There isn't. I mean, there's no technical reason. I think some of that grew out of the Gimbal work that we did, back in Heptio days. So Contour originally deployed Envoy and Contour in the same pod, because in the original days we didn't have TLS between Contour and Envoy in terms of that gRPC communication. So it all happened over localhost, which made that deployment very simple, right? You just deployed a pod, and that pod had everything it needed in there to configure Envoy. But that doesn't scale very well, right? If you ended to have 20 instances of Envoy, you end up having 20 different contours all hitting the same watches on the same API server. So when Gimbal came about, Gimbal was that multi-cluster routing kind of software. Its goal was just to route traffic. So you actually created clusters that were only routing clusters, right? And I could show you the diagram, but it's not really helpful. But the idea is that the whole cluster was used for routing. And then so daemon sets worked well because we wanted to listen on host ports in terms of 80443 because we wanted to terminate locally there. And then the whole cluster was meant just to be a routing cluster. So that fit that whole model. And then it just kind of carried forward, I think, from there.
Yeah, and we kind of talked about some of the networking pieces, with using the external traffic policy local in the service and getting around some of those things. And some of those baby steps are actually taken in the operator. The other major steps is the network publishing API for the operator that's out there, right? Because back to Sanjay's question is like, I bring up, can we use a deployment? We can get around it with the daemon set, right? So if we think of the use case, let me walk through it, right? So we say, okay, instance one of Envoy, right? So we spin up the daemon set, and by default, it's using ADM443. It's running. Now we want to go ahead and do the second instance. And let's say the second instance is called external. The first one is called internal. Now with the network publishing API, we can go in and say, okay, use these ports instead, right? And so it would use different ports. And then further talking through this use case is that we would go ahead and say, the network publishing type for external is load balancer, and the network publishing type for internal is cluster IP, right? And so we'd have these two different daemon sets that could live together because they're listening on different ports, right? Those pods are listening on different ports. And they have two different services as well. The external would use an Envoy service that is kind of like the Envoy service we know today, right? Type load balancer, gets a load balancer IP available to the world. All right, so that service, traffic that hits that service maps to the external daemon set. And then we have another Envoy service that was programmed to say, okay, don't use load balancer, use cluster IP, and traffic that hits that service is going to map to the internal daemon set. I just don't think that that's like the user experience that we would want to say, okay, well, to make this happen, for every additional Envoy or Contour environment that you create, you have to use different ports, right? I think we want to get away from that, and I think that's what a deployment would help us do.
Yeah, I guess like is the service APIs to Contour itself, not the operator proposal, trying to solve these sorts of problems by bringing it down a level and having Contour watch gateway class, et cetera, or is that a reason for why that proposal is the way it is, or is there other? I mean, I'm sure there's other good reasons for that too. I guess. Maybe.
Yeah, I think service API is trying to do the opposite, where you say bring it down a level. I think it's trying to bring it up a level of abstraction to say, hey, you know, like it's trying to, maybe it's trying to bring it up a level, but it's trying to like break this whole space into kind of functional pieces based on persona, right? So it's like all those details the infrastructure person should know, and that goes in the gateway class. And we know that the gateway class itself doesn't hold all those details, right? It points to something that does. And it would point to something like what we're looking at here, right? And so, you know, the infrastructure person that knows all those details will create these different classes. And so that, you know, admins, all they have to do is say, hey, spin up your gateway, point to, you know, the internal or external class, and the infrastructure will be provisioned accordingly. And then go ahead, give your, you know, the thumbs up to your developers, and they can start creating HTTP routes and TLS routes. And that's where Contour, right, is looking for those and making sure that it's acting on the ones that it should based on the binding relationship between the gateway and that route. Yeah, because service APIs by itself, I mean, it can't really do anything, right? Because it has all these extension points meant to be used by implementers like ourselves to do the real work.
That all sounds like a sensible, coherent model to me. I guess I would say I feel like we're gonna have this whole conversation over again when Nick's back. So I might petition to kind of pause here and
yep,
we'll do it again next week, or you know, sometime in the next couple of weeks.
Do you guys know, is James and Nick supposed to be back next week?
I know Nick will be back next week. I'm not sure what James's schedule is.
Yeah, I don't know. I know James is working on some other things as well internal to VMware, but he's still been, you know, doing maintainer things. But I don't, you know, I'm not sure if he's being distracted by his other responsibilities now or not.
Okay. But how do we? Yeah, because it's been a while to get them to have them on one of these calls, and I feel like you know, we're blocked on this, to Steve Chris's point. I mean, I definitely don't feel comfortable moving forward with the implementation side until we have this meeting with Nick and James. So anything that you guys can do on your side to help get us all together, I'd really appreciate that.
Yeah, I think we should just set up some time. I know we were gonna add you to the maintainer meetings. Our goal internally was to have, you know, Contour maintainer meetings to do these kind of discussions. I think these office hours have just turned into that, just because I think we're all on US time zones, and it was scheduled time that we just, you know, put out there. So I think we just need to just set up some more time and just get folks, you know, on the line. Figure out.
Yeah. In the meantime, I'm going through Nick's proposal, and I am going to continue to evolve my proposal. I think I'm gonna actually just kind of help work on some diagrams. I mean, like I say, a picture's worth 1,000 words, and I think I'm gonna add a few different diagrams and just try to elaborate on a few different areas. Yeah, then it'd really be nice to get us together and hammer through these details.
No, but thank you. This helps me at least. I know. Walking through some of this, it's sort of like you said, reading through the stuff is easy, and then I always equate it to doing calculus in high school. When you sat in the board and you're like, hey, I got it. And you go home to do your homework and you're like, wait, what? Because when you have someone else explain it, it's like, oh, that's easy. Then when you do it yourself, it's you realize what you don't understand. So this helps me rationalize it a lot better. So
yeah, and I'm putting stuff together, through my eyes. So definitely appreciate everyone diving in. The more we get people involved, the better the solution is going to be. And just to recap, I mean, think of gateway class as just a pointer to a configuration. A gateway actually being, what a gateway does, like Contour and Envoy together, and then what does Contour do? It reads these HTTP routes, or think of HTTP route as HTTP proxy, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Sounds good to me. I guess I gotta read that whole decision document about star class. This is the decision thing about everything about the class stuff to see about the Ingress stuff as well. I think that's an interesting read. We're doing a lot of reading the last few days.
Yeah, unfortunately,
I'm right there with you.
I was just rereading this issue, and like I said, it's like it documents. Nick says Envoy or Contour will correspond to a gateway class, but it doesn't say why. So we're just gonna have to get Nick and or James on the phone basically to remind us all, explain it.
And do you have any use cases for like the L4 stuff or the UDP stuff at like Red Hat or anything?
Yeah, we do. We've actually have like a backlog of requests to support layer 4 proxying. And we've kind of pushed it off to say, we're not going to go do our own thing. We're going to, work on service APIs and solve the problem there. And so, with service APIs aside, right, the way that we've all been doing business is, right, Ingress didn't meet our needs, so we create our own thing. You guys create HTTP proxy. We created what's we call the route API. And there's a lot of similarities, and I think in many ways, HTTP proxy is better than route. And so we start getting these requests for, okay, we want to be able to do layer 4, so on and so forth. And what we're looking at now as it relates to service APIs is actually using Metal LB as the implementation for kind of a layer 4 service APIs.
So how would that fit into like this then? Would you define, does Metal LB fit in here, or is it just
it'd be similar, right? So it's similar in the sense that we'd have either internal, external gateway class that, again, what is gateway class? It's just going to hold a Metal LB configuration, right? And then a gateway is an instance of Metal LB. And then whenever a TCP route's created, that Metal LB instance, just like Contour would be, is watching for TCP routes and saying, oh, I'm supposed to watch this TCP route thing, and it's pointing at a gateway, foobar gateway, and I am foobar gateway. So then I have the policy that says allow this route from this namespace. So now I'm going to start programming myself accordingly.
Okay. Is there work then to add that to Metal LB then, the service API stuff? Because it has to watch that, right? Or no?
Yeah. So yes, eventually Metal LB, and again, that's not something that I'm leading in right now. It's just kind of like we're at a high level planning standpoint. So we haven't taken any action on it as of now. And we haven't said, okay, this is happening, but we've got our backlog of work, and we spent some time just saying, okay, how do we deal, how do we handle layer 4 stuff? But it's probably before you even touch it, I'm sure it's a good at least 6 months out, right? We're really focused on the work that we're doing here in the community to get, the layer 7 stuff right with Contour.
Sure. No worries. It comes up sometimes with folks. I know we've had some requests for like UDP, at least in the Contour world, of having, Envoy proxy like UDP, and have it proxy TCP as well, like full TCP, not just our TCP over SNI that we do today. I think just because for the sake that we have, Contour sitting at the edge of all these clusters, folks naturally kind of want to add that stuff on and then, leverage that edge component to do some of these things. So I was just curious. It comes up sometimes. I know there was some, if you read some of these designs, you'll see where we explicitly call out, we won't do L4, we won't do L4, we won't do L4.
Yeah, right.
And I was just, and that's fine. I was just curious in terms of, other folks that might be, implementing these things, of what their needs were, and if they thought maybe they would want that or not. Again, just to, diverge, not to have more conversations, but figure out where that might fit in the world. If it's a request for Contour, that's cool, or if it's implementable some other way. Because I think I'm interested still in understanding that story, even if it is like MetalLB or whatever other tool out there, of having a guide of how to do this kind of stuff. I think it's helpful to put together.
Yeah, that's what we've talked about. MetalLB seems like it's a project that's been around. I mean, even before Service APIs, and a while back, I was involved in it a bit. And so, it's a project that we've looked at even before Service APIs and have said, okay, we need to add the support to OpenShift, and we've settled on MetalLB. But again, we haven't really invested engineering beyond just kind of more high level planning. So yeah, keep me posted. If you guys are evaluating something else for layer 4 load balancing, I mean, I'd be curious to know if it's something that you guys are creating or leveraging some other project. I mean, I just figure like layer 4 load balancing by now, like, it's been done for a while. Again, MetalLB seems to be, high on that list. And so to me, it was just kind of a natural fit to say, okay, for layer 7 load balancing, we're going to use Contour, and layer 4, let's use MetalLB instead of creating our own, or as Nick mentioned here, adding layer 4 load balancing to Contour. Again, seems like that problem space has already been solved pretty well. So let's leverage the great work of MetalLB, or if there's another community out there that's doing really good stuff.
Yeah, for sure. There was another line I just found. I'm looking for it now in my notes. Another like MetalLB kind of like clone, sort of, not clone, but L4 type solution. I don't know where it is now.
I think there's another one like KubeRouter that I've seen out there. A few different things, but it seems like, at least in my opinion, MetalLB is what we settle on because of it's been around for a while and it has a pretty good user base and documentation and so forth. But
yeah,
maybe there's something else out there that's worth exploring.
Yeah, I think it came up in one of the issues. Someone was chatting about it in the Contour channel. They were asking for something, and then they were using, and I'd never heard of it. That's why I was curious. I'll find it. I'll probably find it after we all leave. So no big deal.
So does someone want to take an action item, or should I do it? Like, how can we get set up a meeting with Nick and James and finalize this? Because again, I'd like to start moving forward with the implementation, but obviously I don't want to rush it. I want to make sure we're taking the right approach and everyone's on board. And, when you're talking like 2 different projects, the operator and Contour, even though they're under the same org, it's like, okay, we got to make sure that, we get this right. And the operator knows what it's responsible for doing, and vice versa with Contour. Should I just send a message on the Slack channel and ask, or, like what's the best way, Steve, to get us all together and get this knocked out?
Yeah, I was just thinking, I know we've had for forever now, like an internal Tuesday night meeting, which we could just hijack for this, just because I know everyone's scheduled, that time's already on the calendar as of today. And Nick should come online, I guess, Sunday, US time. Which would be his Monday, in terms of coordinating times, I guess. But Yeah, I can send a note. That's fine. I'll poke Nick and James and just say, hey, when you all around? I'd like to do it sooner than later, just to help unblock all of this stuff and help it all move. Because I'd like to get us moving on the actual Contour implementation of Service API as well. I know Nick has the design doc, which I guess we'll chat about as well next week when he comes back, with everyone's comments and stuff. So might need a few meetings to go through all of this.
Yeah. No, I appreciate it. So just keep me posted. And if that's like the maintainers meeting, I know when I met with Nick probably about a month ago, he talked about, having me or add me to that maintainers meeting. But yeah, I'd really appreciate if we could make sure everyone's together and sooner rather than later and hammer through these details. In the meantime, we've got all these documents to review and re-review and re-review until it really starts to sink in. And if anyone else has, other thoughts on it, other approaches, and throw them out there and let's discuss them.
Just a quick question for anyone. Is there anything big and pressing that I should pick up that someone thinks it should be done soon but hasn't had time to, or whatever? Just as I'm searching for things to do.
Can you go implement service APIs?
Yeah, I'll do that. Tomorrow. I'll have a PR tomorrow.
Let's do it. There's a bunch of, there's a bunch of things we just need to sit down and figure out what we, and this is what I think, Steve, you were talking about earlier in the week about having a planning session.
Oh yeah, true. I forgot about that.
Which we need to do. We haven't done that, and it's already Friday-ish. We have this board out here, but I don't know how relevant it is in terms of, where is it? It's what, here? I always lose track of where it is. Here, then here, then here, and then here.
I forgot we talked about that already.
Yeah, this thing. But we need to walk through this. I think we need to get like Ingress v1 finalized just to be compliant with, the spec that's out there in the world. I think folks are going to start upgrading the clusters and wanting to use that possibly. I'm not sure, but just to be complete, I think we should get that finalized. I know I had a PR, which I could probably pull out now and just reuse it because I think it implemented our question before, and that was one of these issues. This one, I think, was how do we tie an Ingress class to Contour, because that matches the gateway class kind of idea, or actually a gateway now. We should take gateway class out of there. I think what we should finalize that. I think I understand how you explain it, Daniel, makes sense to me, and I think we should implement that way, and I think we can. The bigger one, I think, in Ingress v1 is going to be the path thing. So there's a path. Right now, Contour implements a path prefix, but there's actually a path type now in Kubernetes. Ingress v1. There's a path type. Yeah, see path type here. And this says prefix, or you can do
exact match or something.
Exact, yeah. And we don't do an exact at all in Contour. And that actually, for Ingress, it shouldn't be too bad. But we're gonna have to think about that, right? So what if you append like an exact match to a prefix match? You know what I mean? So like if you had /foo/bar, what does that end up in Envoy config? Probably the last one in would be the type, I guess. I don't know. We have to figure out those rules, I guess, with that, because we haven't ever implemented an exact match in Contour.
Okay, so yeah, Nick's comment on the issue that Steve Chris just linked in the chat is similar to his service API proposal in that it's got the Ingress class being associated with Contour and its associated envoys. But you could think about it in the terms of the operator maybe as well, right? So I don't know. I guess I'll read up on more stuff. We don't have to take more time talking about it now, but I'll read up more on this.
Sure. No, I guess
That's
this is my 2 cents of, I don't know, things I think there's lots that we need to do.
Yeah.
But yeah, and this is one thing I think that would be good to get in there. Again, just to complete it, but no one's really asked for it, but I don't know.
I mean, the V1 Beta 1 ingress is going to go away in a couple of Kubernetes releases. So like,
Yeah, worth it.
I mean, I guess we can always just, partially support V1, but yeah, I do think we're going to need this stuff sooner than later. But yeah, I still feel like we're overdue for a like granular planning session where we kind of wipe the board clean and like start fresh. Cause I just feel like the stuff that's in there is stale, and I've been staring at the same set of issues for the last 6 months since I've been on the team, and like, they don't actually reflect the priorities. So
yeah. Even just planning out the service APIs work, I think we should, break all this stuff out. Should that become a hyper issue or a what's it called?
an epic.
An epic, yeah, that's it. Sorry, I haven't done this in a while. An epic that we do like this and the bust it out into other issues or what, or have some good labels or whatever, to help understand that work. And then, because I think we're broken up enough that there's not an issue of having it be split apart in different pieces. I mean, people could work on it all at the same time on certain things, I guess. But yeah, I just I don't know. I want to make it easy for folks to jump in and it's like, oh, I want to take that or I want to go do this, and then have it all kind of spelled out. But I guess we need to sit and do that work to get it ready for folks to consume and stuff,
Yeah. A little bottlenecked at the moment.
Yeah.
But
It's just hard because we can't do all of it, but it's hard.
yeah.
But yeah. So I think we just do some planning. I think that to me, that's that. I think the rate limiting stuff, see if you've done, I don't want to lose the momentum and the thoughts, because I've done this before where I worked on something and then came back 6 months later and it was like, wait, why did we do that? I know with the cert stuff that I wrote, pulling out, there's something else, Danny, that I worked on. I think if you want to take a look, it's something we went to talk about. I have this PR here to move the cert gen stuff into a package, a public package in Contour. And then we could remove the init container from the operator. We could have the operator actually generate the certs automatically through this package. So we're curious about your thoughts
Yeah,
on
and
that.
I've been tagged on it, and I've been so wrapped up with the service API stuff, I haven't had a chance to look at it, but it's definitely on my list. And, yeah, no, I appreciate you putting this together.
No worries. But I know when I came back from Christmas, I just basically started over because it was, I had a PR I have written and then I was like, I'm not sure where this ended up. So I just started over. It was easier that way. So yeah, sorry, Sanjay, that's not a good answer for you. But.
Oh no, that makes. I mean, I'm just gonna read. I gotta leave in like half an hour or so anyway today. But like today and tomorrow, I'm working on like upstream Envoy stuff, so I'll keep doing that tomorrow, and then keep reading about ingress, class, etc. things. Maybe pick up a small issue. I saw a small thing about like adding a specific field to the HTTP option, so maybe I'll pick that one up too. But yeah. Cool. Thanks all.
Yeah.
I know we still have some outstanding stuff on external auth as well. Like there were like a dozen individual issues that needed to be done, and several of them haven't been done yet. So I'm not sure if any of those are like actionable right now, but that might be a good area to look at and see if we can kind of drive that to closure. I think there's like some integration tests.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Metrics, a few other things.
Where's that? There's like a parent issue somewhere.
Yeah, 432 is the parent issue. I'm just looking at it.
Does GitHub have, I forget if GitHub has actual Epic cards or is it just, oh, it's milestones. That's what it is, right?
Oh yeah, here you go.
It seems like the way that we've done it in Contour is just with these checklists and linked issues. So there's not formally, no issue is tagged as an epic. It's just that we have kind of one parent issue that links out to a bunch of individual tasks. But, I think we'd be open to changing how we do that if we wanted to. There hasn't really been a formal structure to it historically.
I think we've done both. I think sometimes this has been helpful just to keep stuff together. But at the same time, this is a comment on another issue at the bottom that not easy to find in the same sense, but it's nice to see it all right here though,
Yeah.
I think it'd be great to have an OIDC example too. It's come up a few times. We talked about that a little bit in the beginning, wherever that Istio thing I had went. Either using that or something else, or I know someone else, I think Robin Foe, I think they had a proof of concept that they wrote way back when we started this that would be interesting to finalize that or something. But to have that OIDC story, I think would be super helpful for external auth.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of stuff to do. It's just we got to figure out an order and what to do it in.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that planning meeting should be hopefully that happens. We can get that done soon.
And we ship in what, 2 weeks? Another release? I don't know.
3 weeks, yeah. I mean, we'll ship what we have, but it might be another small one.
Yeah.
And that reminds me, we talked at the end of last year about maybe getting a little bit more formal with our release dates because of the operator dependency now and us needing to kind of be ready at the same time. So
yeah,
probably add that to the list of things to discuss. In the next week or two.
So release dates, backlog, priorities, and then all the design docs are the biggest one.
Yeah. I feel like we may need to have like daily meetings to kind of try and catch up on this backlog of project stuff. Yeah. It's just tough, with the differing time zones.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
What's good is that it's winter here and summer in Australia. So we're 2 hours closer at the moment. I think come February or March, we move back. I think 2 hours further apart, which makes it harder for time zones. But at least for us, I mean, us East Coasters.
Yeah, it's not too bad for me. But I mean, if we can get a bunch of work lined up and spec'd out ahead of time, then that kind of reduces the friction of the time zones for all of us. But right now we don't have a backlog of actionable work. And so everyone's kind of just waiting. Yeah. Which is tough.
I think we can also just, at least in the short term, is pulling down this PR count here and figuring out like the ingress stuff, Sanjay, like if we're gonna, put this off for now, or somehow put the work you did in a doc or something, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Figure that out, and then we can either close it or get it done. Just get the reviews through all these different bits. I think would be super helpful. Just to reduce all, because that just stresses me out a little bit having all the having 13 PRs.
Yeah.
So that would be good too.
Cool.
Yeah. I don't know. Is there anything else you want to talk about?
Nothing else from me.
I'm good.
Yeah, I'm seeing no one else new has come. Next week, Daniel, is there any good or bad days for you in terms of like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday? So I guess it would be, let's see, it's what, 6:41 in Australia. So it's 7. So at 4, it's 8 a.m., 4 p.m. Eastern. So 1 p.m. Eastern, or what, Pacific? I guess it'd be the earliest probably Nick could probably meet if we poke him into it.
Would be like on a Tuesday or a Monday, or?
I just didn't know if you had like, oh yeah, Monday I'm booked or Tuesday I'm booked, or, from a general, just because I'll poke Nick and James and see what they are. But if I know there's certain days that are bad for you, we can work to avoid those. And
it's usually like afternoons Pacific time.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes. Mm-hmm. No pressure too.
Afternoons are usually because most of my teammates are East Coast, so most of our meetings are in the morning, and my afternoons are usually open. So, and this is obviously a high priority for me. So whatever works for them, I'll make it work with my schedule.
Okay, cool.
Well, if there's nothing else, I'm going to drop off and go get some lunch.
Yeah,
Sounds
we can
good.
do that.
Let's call it.
Cool. Thank you all. This is fun.
Yeah, good to chat, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. I'll catch y'all later.
Catch
See
you
ya.
online. Bye.
Have a good one.